Okay, let's get going. Thanks for being here. So on Tuesday we had Professor Okamura talk, and she represented sort of the research aspect of assistive technology. Does anybody have any comments or questions they'd like to share with us? You know, as I mentioned, you know, when you do research or you're promoting a product, you really have to measure how well your product is, and so you can compare it to existing products, so you can say that it's better with science behind it. So to me, it was very interesting that she applied like control theory type things and did a lot of measurement in order to show improvement. But we're not doing that in this class, but if you're doing any type of research project, you'll be doing things like that. Okay. So there's two things coming up that I want to talk to you about. And Andra emailed me today, and apparently there's an event next Wednesday, the 11th, up in San Francisco. There's this group called Robotics for Humanity that started out of Willow Garage, the robotics company, a few years ago. And it was started by Henry Evans, who's a quadriplegic that lives in the area. And he and Willow Garage got together and started addressing the need for robotics to help people with disabilities. And so his group is called Robotics for Humanity. And Henry has given a couple of TED Talks. Steve Cousins was the head of Willow Garage. So there's this event up in the city that you're all welcome to go to, free of charge. Normally $15, but you know, the bad thing, it's the day before your midterm presentation, so maybe they're recording it, and so might be interesting. Another opportunity is the RESNA Student Design Competition. This is a professional society for rehab engineers and technologists that work in assistive technology. So every year for about maybe the last 30 years, they've had this sponsored a student design competition, and they're addressing students just like you who are working on projects. So you can make your project do double duty by applying to be a competitor. And I think more than likely, all you would have to do is modify your final report, and the timing looks right that you can do that. Maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, one of the student teams did apply, and they were one of the 10 finalists, and they got an all-expense paid trip to Washington, D.C. To present their project to professionals. So it could be very worthwhile, and it may not take a whole lot of effort on your part to submit an application. So please consider doing that. Okay. So today, I want to remind you that there's a sign-up sheet for carpools to the VA on Tuesday. That's where we're going. I'll be in touch with you to remind you, which car you're in and all the information about cell phone numbers and stuff like that. And as you recall, the midterm presentations are next week at this time, and there's a sign-up sheet for the time slots, and a lot of people have signed up already. And I just wanted to tell you that last year what I did is, if you signed up to present first at the midterm, that's inverted for the finals, and you'll be presenting last. So you have to consider both, the midterm and final slots. So that's up here. I think there's 3 open slots for the remaining teams. Want to just remind people to make up missed lectures, to send me their progress reports, send me emails when something happens, positive or negative, so I can share in your enjoyment of that, or help you out if you have a problem. If you don't sign up with me, you can just send an email, tell me when you're available, and I'd be happy to meet with you most any time. Carpooling. sign-up sheet. If you're driving on your own, please let me know. So number one, I know that you're going, you're planning to be there, and number two, I can send you a map. So please email me with that information. So this is the sign up for a time slot for next Thursday for teams working on projects. Again, I can see a lot of activity in student projects these past couple weeks, so keep up the good work on that, and want you to spend some time preparing for your midterm presentations next Thursday. And also the midterm reports are due the Tuesday afterward, so you're going to have to do a little bit more work to get those in. Okay, so yeah, I talked about this already. So for the midterm presentations, the way that it worked best last year is if everybody sent me their PowerPoints and I can run them off this one laptop. So we avoid, swapping laptops for each team. It really saves a lot of time. So the 8 minutes is dependent on having all the presentations on the laptop. But if you really want to run it off of your laptop, you get six minutes instead of 8 minutes. Okay, so be aware of that. So I would need the stuff by the noon of the date of noon of next Thursday, so I can make sure that everything runs okay. Okay. If anybody has video files, send it to me in AVI format. There's a place on the internet you can convert them to AVI called Zamzar, Z-A-M-Z-A-R. It's a very nice website, free. You don't have to download anything. You just have to upload your file and it will convert it. And there'll be a web page that you can link to retrieve it, the converted file. So that's very neat. So in the first lecture I talked a little bit about famous people with disabilities. But I thought I'd extend that a little bit and talk about famous cartoon characters with disabilities. And so we've seen, all the cartoon characters that I knew growing up as a kid. A lot of them were individuals because they had a disability, and maybe we had made fun of them or laughed at them. And then Walt Disney tried to come up with which Disney princess are you? So it was all male, and because the obvious disabilities are using a wheelchair or having an amputation, that's all they showed. So obviously there's more disabilities than those two. But it was interesting that they addressed that. Okay, but extending it a little bit further, I thought it might be interesting to talk about famous TV characters with disabilities. And how many people are familiar with Big Bang Theory? Okay. So we're going to go through each of these characters individually, and I'm going to ask you what you think their disability is, and we'll see how correct you are. So we'll start with Raj. Who can tell me about Raj? Yeah.
He can't talk to women unless he's
yeah. Okay. That's right. Do you think that's a real disability? I mean, do you think that's real? Do you think there's other people that might have that? I know that some people are shy, maybe reluctant to.
I mean, not specifically like a certain phobia, maybe, but not like specifically like.
I'm not sure it's a phobia. And remember what he called it? He called it selective mutism. Do you think that's a real term? What do you think?
Is it an extension of social anxiety?
It could be, and I was thinking of it as being like an extension of shyness. And this is actually a real term, and it's usually a characteristic of kids who are shy and can talk, but when there's a stranger around or something, they choose not to speak. And as you recall, there was an episode where he was afraid of spiders, so that's arachnophobia. So there's actually therapy for arachnophobia using virtual reality. They sort of put you in a virtual world, and you see a spider from far away, and it's really small, and they gradually increase your exposure, make the spider bigger and stuff like that. I've also seen real life versions of that therapy too, where you see something from across the room, and for every session you get closer and closer to it. So that's arachnophobia. Okay, how about Sheldon? Sheldon has a lot of problems or issues. He has a lot of character, let's say that. Who can tell me something about Sheldon? Yes? OCD, okay. I'll go with that. They never really mention that. But what are the things that he says about himself? Do you remember? You guys aren't as much of a fan as I am because you got homework, right? Okay. So Sheldon has an eidetic memory, okay, and that means he can recall by date, what he was doing on that date, what he was eating, and what he was wearing. And actually, that's a real that's a real issue. One of the people who's been identified with this is Mary Lou Henner, and they've had a couple of 60 Minutes episodes, and you ask them what they did on a certain day, and they'll know exactly what they did, what they wore, what the weather was, and stuff like that. So it turns out that with these people that have this condition, they just don't forget. It's not that they remember more than us, they don't forget as much. So there's several dozen people in the U.S. that have this condition. And we talked about OCD, and remember Sheldon said he's a bit of a germophile, which is different from Germanophile, which is the fear of the country of Germany. So you don't want to confuse those things. He has a lot of autistic behaviors, knocking 3 times, right? And people have suggested that he's crazy, but his mother had him tested, so it's not crazy. Okay, what about Leonard? He has 2 things, but you have to watch the episodes carefully. Anybody know? Okay, so he's an asthmatic. He has his inhaler with him, and here he is shaking it. And he also is lactose intolerance. Now, lactose intolerance is interesting because it's actually a mutation that we have normally, back in the caveman days, those humans weren't able to digest cow's milk. But through mutation, that a lot of us are able to, but there's still a lot of people that can't. So we're all mute. Anybody that can digest cow's milk is a mutant. Okay. So in here, it says some of the symptoms of lactose intolerance. And instead of saying flatulence, they say noise, which I thought was pretty cute. Okay. How about Howard? He has 2 conditions. Okay, you guys aren't TV watchers. So he has severe peanut allergy, and here's him, being allergic, and fear of going into space, which is actually a term called astrophobia. So for peanut allergies, there are medications you can take, and then there's another type of exposure therapy where they give you a very small amount initially, and you build up not an immunity to peanuts. And this has actually worked with kids. So there's somebody in this picture that we've forgotten. We've forgotten Penny, and she has one big disability, but it's a trick question. Okay, anybody care to guess? She has no last name. And if you don't have a last name, it's hard to get along in society. I mean, unless you're Cher or Madonna, right? So, you can't get a job if you have a last name, a social security number. If you only had one name and you applied to Stanford, I'm sure they would reject you. So, okay. So having no last name is an issue. But there's another part-time actor, Barry Kripke. Anybody remember him? What's his issue? I mean, it's pretty obvious.
It's a speaking disability?
Yeah, he has a speech impediment called rhoticism. And it's the same condition that Elmer Fudd has, where he can't pronounce R's, pronounces R's as W's. So Elmer Fudd would say, wascally wabbit. So this is a condition that speech therapy can help. So I read up a little bit about it. So it's a matter of training your tongue to form, to speak the letter R. So you have to be persistent in it. And I remember we had a kid in school, and we all laughed at him because he had this. But usually outgrow it. Okay, that's this stuff. So next Thursday, here's all the teams and their projects. And next Tuesday, we're going to the VA. And I want to here's a map of how we get to the VA. So Stanford's over here, and we go out the back way and take Unipro Serra, past Page Mill, and the next light is Hillview. Make a left turn there and a right turn onto Miranda, and you'll see the VA on your left. You'll be coming down this road, going in the main entrance here, and parking in this lot. And your destination is where the star is, the corner of the spinal cord injury building, building number 7. And we'll convene in room E111, and we'll meet our host in that room. So I want to show you some pictures from last year so that you'd be prepared for all the fun that you're going to have, okay? So we're in the assistive technology lab here, and Karen is showing some programs that provide access to computers. There's some communication boards in the background here. There's other communication devices and devices that control the room and the TV and the phone. We'll see those. Here's a device that's an eye gaze communication device. And you get a chance to try that out. So just by using your eyes, you can use your eyes to point to letters of the alphabet and form a sentence which you can communicate if you're non-vocal and don't have use of your hands. And then we'll go outside, and Debbie will show us some of the neat stuff that she has. This is a hand bike. You power it with your hands, and it's a recumbent bike. There's other bikes. This bike in front, I think you pedal with your feet in a recumbent manner. There's a basketball wheelchair that they use for playing wheelchair basketball, and you can try that out. And so here are the folks trying it out, and see everybody is smiling, so you know they're having a good time. Okay. And this is Julia. She's actually a race car driver, and she's practicing with a powered wheelchair. So you'll get a chance to do that on Tuesday. So get ready. Yeah, a lot of fun. So this is interesting. So it's a pedaled by your legs, but you steer it with your arms. And I think there's also a gear shift and brake at the hand level. And here's the basketball wheelchair. And it's really hard to, your hands got to do double time. You got to, handle the ball, and then you have to, move your wheelchair. So it's pretty challenging. And here you can see the hand bike, and in this case, you use this big rotary motion of both hands, and there's a brake on it, and I think there's a gear shift on this one too. Lots of fun. Everybody smiling and having a good time. Okay, today we're going to have Gary Burke. He's a prosthetist. Talk to us about prosthetic stuff and orthotic stuff. And we'll take a short break here. So if you haven't signed in yet, if you haven't signed up for a time slot, a carpool place, or a meet with Dave, or you haven't gotten a cookie yet, now's the time. And everybody else, take a stretch. Hi there. Yeah, just a second. Record, I want you sorry, it took a little bit longer than normal. Oh, great. Oh. me transfer the mic over to you when you're ready. This space here?
Ultimately, maybe. Yeah, once we get afterwards more than now. Yeah, it's fine. Oh, thank you, yeah. Okay. I could probably do it. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Sorry? Oh, okay.
Gary Burke. He's a prosthetist and an adjunct clinical assistant professor and director of prosthetics in Stanford's Department of Orthopedic Surgery. And he's also the owner of Gary Burke Prosthetics and Orthotics. You named it after yourself.
Well, yeah, someone's got to do that.
He has both a clinical and a workplace situation. He's worked and lectured nationally and internationally on prosthetic care and multiple locations. He has an interest in investigating cost-effective strategies that enhance the lives of those required to use prostheses and orthosis daily. So let's welcome Gary Burke.
Thank you. Kind of want to get to know that guy. Okay. So I have to go this way. There we go. All right, so that's me. I want to talk a little more generally today about prostheses, but really more about how we interface with humans when machines. How does that go together? And so I'm going to jump around a little bit, not physically, but through my discussion. And we're going to talk about a variety of different things. And hopefully somewhere in there will change your thought process a little bit about what it takes to provide things to humans rather than just robotics. So I want to start with a question. I haven't done this. This is a new trick. How many people have seen on the internet, on the news, whatever, stories about prostheses and the newfangled fun stuff? Keep your hands up if you've seen any stories about artificial limbs, prostheses. Wonderful. Okay, good. How many of you, with your hands up currently, feel that one day prostheses will exceed current human capacity? We'll be able to do more with prosthesis than we will with human limbs. How many of you are willing to cut off your feet to find out? Okay, there's one. We got one who's willing to do that. The problem that we have is this balance between technology and humans. And the problem is humans. Right? I'm not going to cut off my feet to find out if I can run faster. It's just not going to happen. So what I want to concentrate on today is the human part of human interface design. My friend, ex-friend, Oscar Pistorius, despite his social problems, was actually an amazing athlete. For those of you who know the story. And just a quick terminology thing here. What we're talking about here is a prosthesis, right? A prosthesis is an artificial limb. No problem. I think about the human interface portion as the socket and the entire thing as the prosthesis. So that becomes important later when we get into some other issues. But a prosthesis, it's got to fit. It's got to fit well. It's got to be comfortable. It's got to be allow for the transference of energy in such a way that is amazingly efficient. Well, I'm going to talk about why that might be harder than you think. And the other thing is once you have that thing touching the ground or some other object, the relationship between the ground reaction and the socket and the limb is also going to affect some of this function and comfort and the things we're going to talk about. So that alignment is incredibly important. So a whole prosthesis is more than just a part. And when you walk or you exceed human capability, it's going to have some pressure. Where is that pressure going to go? There's still a human attached to the other parts of it. All right? So if you're going to lift this car, what are we going to replace everything all the way down the chain? And so if there is something that goes down to the ground, then yeah, maybe that can support that type of weight, irrespective of what's happening with that arm or that leg or whatever. And the difference to me between robotics and prosthetics is the idea that robotics starts with a task to be completed or a problem to be solved, whereas a prosthesis starts with the person and their goals and their limitations. That to me is a big and significant difference to how we approach the problem-solving aspect of someone who has an amputation. That and the fact that everybody's different. I mean, even if we look around the room, everybody's got sort of a different shape and a different configuration. Not everyone can be as tall as I am. And sometimes our patients look like this. And given that everyone is different and has a different shape and different needs, are there some things we can say about human interface design that is a little bit more general? Some things to sort of hang our hat on. And I think about this a lot. And this is how I spend my sort of off time when I'm not making prostheses. And more importantly to me is how do we ensure the long-term benefit, success, right? If we ship a prosthesis off to Nairobi, in 2 years, what's going to happen to this kid? Right? Maybe I'm on to the next project. Maybe they've moved villages, but they still have the need. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that there's long-term, not just an event, it's a process? So I think about life. I heard this lecture, actually, from a business guy. I don't do a lot of business stuff. But he talked about these moments of truth. And moments of truth are really an interesting concept to me. It's basically these independent things that occur sort of overlap. And they're important considerations for a device or an event or an experience that'll interface with a person, and any one of them along the way can destroy the whole process. So, I have an example. I think about going on a first date. It's been a couple weeks. And you want to go on that date and you go to a restaurant and it's your first date and you want everything to go perfect. And so you pick the perfect restaurant and you walk in and you have your first moment of truth. You meet the person at the front and they say, "Come on in, we're ready." Got your name down, everything went smoothly, things are going good, right? The next moment of truth is the menu. Oh, you found something you like, that's great. Oh, it's lovely, the music is playing, and oh my God, the food is incredible, this date is going wonderfully. And then a rat runs across your foot. That's a moment of truth. Right? Are you going to go back to that restaurant? Not a chance, right? Irrespective of how well everything else went, that one item destroyed the whole experience for you. And I think in prosthetics, and I think in human interface design, and we'll talk about different things that we design that we wear, that there's 5 moments of truth. I call them the 5 C's. Okay? Comfort, and I'll dive into each of these in a little bit. Cosmesis, the way something looks. Thank goodness there's a C in function. Otherwise, I got bigger problems. Cost, and cool. Those are the 5 things, the 5 moments of truth in any human interface design. And now I have to prove that to you. So let's go through it. Comfort. What does comfort mean? Well, comfort's hard. What makes something comfortable? I think it's a lot easier to say what makes something uncomfortable. Right? So I tend to think about it as, okay, well, that's uncomfortable. That makes me uncomfortable or feels uncomfortable. So comfort to me is that you have to transfer pressure in a way that is not painful or not obnoxious. No noxious stimuli, noise. Right? We don't want things that bring attention to ourselves in any way. Certainly vibrations can be noxious. We don't want things that just, every time you take a step your leg vibrates. That seems just horrible to me. Heat. Heat's a big one. Right? Gets 100 degrees outside. Are we going to be wanting to wear gloves? Nuisance. How easy is it to put on and take off? We could have a prosthesis that fits perfectly, but if it takes you an hour to put on in the morning, you're not going to use it. Weight. If it weighs 80 pounds, no matter how well it does all this other stuff, it's too much. Weight's a big one. I hear complaints about weight all day, every day. And oftentimes it's, my shoes are too heavy, or it's a pound. But that's a lot, and depending on the physics of it. So weight's a big concern in terms of comfort. And then sensitivity, right? If you have an area of sensitivity, or you have allergies or skin problems, and we'll dive into some of those. So my friend Flav here, I don't wear a watch, right? Because I find it kind of bulky and heavy and in the way. I don't know how he deals with this level of comfort. Right? But I think that that's probably not a comfortable device to wear, and probably why most of us don't wear watches that look like this, because they're a bit of a nuisance and they're heavy and they're kind of in the way. But I do wear a Fitbit, and Fitbit, not all that long ago, decided we're going to change our design a little bit. We'll put a little bit of nickel plating on the back there just to make it kind of interesting, and a whole group of people developed skin irritations. Big recall. Everything went back, right? It was a design failure. Even though the original design worked great and I still love it. Right? So this is a nuisance. This is a pain. This is a skin problem. This is a comfort issue. And one that actually destroyed a product. So it has to be comfortable. This was one of my epic fails in the prosthetic world. It doesn't appear to be an epic fail, but it was. Young lady lost her arm to a tumor and came to us for this fancy high-tech prosthesis. myoelectrically controlled, powered hand device, battery operated. We cut it down so it wasn't too hot. It looked nice. She put a shirt on and it covered everything. It looked great. She was excited. She took it home and she got it home and wrote me a nice note. Dear Gary, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is great. I love my new arm. I don't wear it outside because it's too hot and it's too heavy. But I really like to show my friends. Right? That's a failure. I don't want her there to show her friends. I want her to use it and be able to use it in her daily life. That's the wrong goal. We met the wrong goal. Right? So heat and weight are a big problem with these devices, and she doesn't use it to this day. The other problem with comfort is that it's a little bit elusive. How many of you all gone into a shoe store, bought a pair of shoes, gotten home and said, oh my God, these things are killing me? All right? Yeah, there's a couple. What was I thinking? It felt great in the store. What happened? Right? So we're always chasing comfort. We're chasing this idea that what is it and what is uncomfortable about it? Well, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't fit good. I hate these shoes. Right? $300 and I hate them. That's not particularly acceptable. But it's hard to nail down comfort. Right? And what's acceptable comfort, especially in something like a prosthesis, where I don't know what comfortable really is. We know what uncomfortable is, but I don't think I could tell you what comfortable means in a prosthesis, and I don't think many people who wear prostheses know where that level of comfort starts and stops. It's tolerance, really. Cosmesis. And you all can just feel free to jump in if you have major questions. Hopefully I'll catch them all along the way. But so what does cosmetic mean? What is good looking? Do we all have maybe different opinions? I think we do. This guy rocks this look like nobody else. I'm not sure I could pull it off to that level of spectacularness. But for him, this is a statement. It's a comment. It's a cosmetic approach. Right? Whether that's my style or your style or his style, whatever. Cosmesis is another one of those things where we just kind of chase, what does that mean? Some of it has to do with how we perceive ourselves. And in light of changes to the body in a traumatic amputation, that's going to affect how we see ourselves and our need for certain levels of cosmesis that are appropriate, whatever, again, that means to each individual. Oftentimes in upper extremity limb loss, we will see the need to look quote-unquote normal. We want our hands to be full and complete and look human. In lowers, we're switching a little bit. This is now considered relatively cosmetic, whereas when I started in this field years ago, this was an unacceptable cosmesis. No one would ever consider going out with their leg looking like that. It had to be covered, it had to fill in the pants, so it changes a little bit. And the most important aspect is that for a reason that I fully do not understand, some people will give up comfort for cosmesis. Right? Guys in the room are going, well, that doesn't look very comfortable. And but it's true. Right? So we balance our C's. Right? We will sometimes say, well, you know what, I'm going to give up that comfort side because, dang, those are cute. Okay? So that's what the C's are about as well, that balance for each individual. When it comes to function, I think about it, it's another one that's a little tough to talk about, right? Does it do what we say it's going to do? Perfect example, glasses. Whether they have glass in them or not. Glasses are fabulous, right? They allow you to see. That's it. Now, they happen to maybe be more cosmetic or less cosmetic, depending on your needs. But they have one function, And they do it perfectly, which is why we use them. Right? They're great. They're wonderful. We've narrowed our goals down to, I gotta see, so therefore I'll wear glasses. Perfect. What a great thing. And the question becomes, especially in prosthetics, is there a device that can do everything that we need it to? Or do we narrow our functional goals down to one or two things? And the example in prostheses is the good old-fashioned hook. Gets about a 10 on the function scale, gets about a 0 on the cosmetic scale. Right? These are incredibly functional devices. Bless you. Not very expensive. The hook costs about $300 for that. I fit this gentleman with this device, and he closed his eyes, reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet without ever looking. That's not bad function, right? That allows you to feel through this cable mechanism whether that hook is open or closed, whether it's opening or closing. You know how much pressure you're putting on something. It's really extremely functional, but it's ugly. And so we, as the prosthetic profession, decided that we're going to move now into bionics, which is a term I really despise. Right? What is bionics? Well, I looked it up and I got Christina Aguilera. Not helpful at all. I think bionics, when I was a kid, we had the Bionic Man. It was a made-up term that talked about the guy, the superhuman dude that was all fake. And we want now to create this bionic environment, and it tends to mean high-tech. It tends to mean electronic. It tends to mean something way beyond what we've got. And so we've got now these terminal devices, these prostheses that are myoelectrically run, battery operated, multi-finger activity, and they can do this, which is great, right? You can grasp. They hit about a 3 or 4 on our functional scale of 10. Why? Because there's no feedback loop. You don't know whether the hand is opening or closing. You don't know how much pressure you're putting on something. And so you tend to not use it in the same way as you might use a hook. It hits about a 5 or 6, maybe a little higher on the cosmetic scale because you can cover it and make it look more like a natural hand. So we get up there in the cosmetic side. In the comfort side, we're only about a 5. It's heavy, it's noisy, it's kind of hard to use. Sometimes it doesn't quite work the way we want it to. So we haven't accomplished a lot, and we certainly haven't accomplished much more than what you can do with your natural limb. Right? That looks a lot the same to me, except this one you get sensation. You can feel what you're doing. You're not going to crush your tomato or potato or whatever you happen to be doing. So we have a problem with especially upper limb prostheses in that approximately 50% of the people that use them stop using them. And this is held true irrespective of the technology that we put in place. So we're missing the boat somewhere. And we've got a lot of work to do in this area. Cool. One of my favorites. It's fascinating to me that people will go out and stand in line all night to get an iPad when the first iPad, nobody even knew what it was or what it did. Right? It's all sort of because of this cool concept. And we have a bit of a problem with technology, especially in healthcare world. We like things because they're cool and because they're new and because they use high-tech materials or they're made in a new way. But oftentimes we introduce this stuff to the market without really any quantifiable benefit. And my perfect example for this is hip replacement. A couple years back, everybody was coming out with a new hip. All right, the old ones did okay. Wasn't really a problem. But we wanted them to be lighter, and we wanted them to be stronger, and we wanted them to be less irritating. And so if you asked DePuy or Stryker or Smith & Nephew, what the thinking was. They said, well, God, we've got this new metal on metal. We can make it. We can mill this metal even better. Well, it's causing debris, and they had to be removed. And DePuy had 40% of theirs fail. Simply to solve the problem of new technology, not solving the real problem is getting these to work and people to be comfortable and return to their normal activities. Drug companies do this sort of stuff all the time. It's interesting. So my point is that I think that we often miss the boat. We're not solving problems with technology. We're just applying technology. And I think it's important that if you have a technology, you don't say, oh, let's just use it. Let's think about where we can maybe solve a problem that we're currently having. In upper limb prostheses, sure, there's plenty of problems. Right? And so the fact that it is cool, looks cool, let's design things around the people that we need to help rather than just applying a technology because we can. Some of these will go on to succeed and be amazing things. The foot down at the bottom is out of Vanderbilt. Really interesting design. Michael Goldfarb's group out of there is brilliant folks, right? Will it go on to do something? Maybe. Maybe. The other is I have my doubts. Part of the reason I think that we fail in some things too, in our human interface design, is cost. I would love to drive this car. And I'd love it even more if someone else paid for it. Sort of like an insurance company or something, right? The problem we have with cost is we have insurance that pays for prostheses. And now we have an insurance environment, especially in this country, but we're a little behind all the rest of the world, that is a little nervous about spending, $200,000 or $300,000 for one prosthesis. Right? So how do we balance cost with technology? This is really a cool thing. This is all part of the DARPA project and DECA project and all of these things that are coming out. This guy had an electrical accident where he lost both arms at the shoulder. Right? His regular prosthesis was on the right. This newfangled 27 degrees targeted muscle reinnervation device is now on the left. And he's able to do some really cool and interesting and amazing things. All right, so how do we draw the line of technology versus cost? And I think that in my world, let me rephrase, in my world, if I come in and I say, this is available, your insurance company is going to pay $1,000 for this. You have to pay $299,000. You think people do that? So it's that balance versus what you can afford, what you get from that. What do I get for $300,000? Well, you get surgery, you get 6 months to a couple of years of physical occupational therapy. You get to go to Chicago a lot, which is nice. And you get a prosthesis that maybe is more functional than what you have. I guarantee it's going to be heavier. I guarantee it's going to be noisier. And I guarantee you're not going to get sensation yet. So where's that line? And so when you think about these things and you think about design and you combine these cost issues, you got to keep those folks in mind and where this is going to fit into their world and the new evolving insurance world in this country that doesn't want to pay for anything. They're not even paying for the things that we do now. So there isn't a device that's perfect for everybody. This is one of my successes. This is one of my favorites. Tumor, lost his arm, actually almost half of his entire chest wall on the right side. They don't do these on the left because the heart's in the way and you won't survive it, but they do it on the right. And his only goal was to go scuba diving. That's all. So we made a device to hold his tanks on. That's it. Cost about $500. Custom made. Big hook. and it held his tanks on, and he sent me that. That's cool stuff. Right? So I think that we have to design for goals, design for those people. Go. So how do we use these C's in our real life? Well, I like to use them to actually go back and pick designs that failed and pick through them. My personal current favorite. I think that's kind of a failure, but that's okay. That's my opinion. Why do I think this failed? Well, functionally, probably okay. I can't say for sure. I think, Apple has this really cool way of handing you something and letting you figure out what it's supposed to do. Or Google. It's all good. Functionally, probably just fine. Comfort, a little heavy. Cosmesis, okay. I suppose for that function you can give up some of that cosmesis. That's okay too. Cost, probably a little pricey, but for all of that great stuff you get. Cool, absolutely. So where's the failure? For me, the failure was the comfort of everybody else around you. All right? Someone walks into a patient room with these on, and I panicked. Are you filming me? What's going on over there? Are you paying attention to what I'm saying? Or are you just watching a movie? So I think the comfort part of it is the big issue, but it's everybody else's comfort in this particular case. So we'll see where this goes. I see some great uses for this, right? Limited use stuff, surgery, flying an airplane, driving a car, maybe. Right? But for walking around town during the day, I think it's a real problem. There's a sixth C. It's not really a moment of truth type of C, but it's an important one. And the sixth C is, come on, change. Everything changes. So there's psychological change, which I think about as, I used to like the color blue, now I like red. Or I used to love those shoes. You should have seen what I wore in the 70s, right? I used to love those outfits. Not so much anymore. Okay? So we evolve and we change in our likes and our comforts and our desires. But more importantly, especially in the prosthetic world, is physical change. So I've been married for about 20-something years. Okay? And last week I decided I was going to go into the local pub and I was going to take off my wedding ring and I was going to see what was going to happen. Didn't go so well, right? Why? Because of the physiologic change that occurred. The soft tissues changed. The bone structure has been known to change under pressure. Muscle changes. And imagine in a prosthesis where you're putting all your weight through it all day, every day, the amount of change that occurs to those soft tissues. And that happens yearly, like my ring. It can happen monthly, whether it's a cyclical change or just with time. We see daily changes with diet and weight gain and weight loss. And we see hourly changes, where you walk for an hour and a half and you go up a hill and all of a sudden your leg has changed to a point where the prosthesis doesn't fit anymore. That's a real problem. This is constant change in an environment that doesn't change at all. All right, so how do we adapt to change and how do we design for those changes? And more importantly, how do we predict when and how they're going to occur? When you saw those little kids, you guarantee they're going to change. But there's no pattern to growth. Sometimes they get a little bit broader. Sometimes they get a little bit longer and thinner. And how do we adapt devices to change along with those kids? There's a problem that needs solving. So I want to take a minute here, and we're going to, I was told I'd got to be interactive with my talk. So I'm going to try to be interactive. This is a new weird thing. And we're going to talk about how a prosthesis is made, because a lot of people really have no concept of that. So I'm going to get you all involved. We're going to start with process, okay, about how a prosthesis is made. So the first step, I'll just have you hold up cards. We'll start here. Preoperatively, congratulations, you're in a motorcycle accident. You're in the hospital, and the doctor says, sorry, we're going to have to cut off your leg. Prosthetist will be in a few minutes, right? So I get to go in, and I get to say, okay, here's what the future holds for you. Given your other injuries, given what's going on, here's what it looks like in the next 5 years or 10 years. Okay? Don't lose that card, it's important. Okay. 2 days later, I come back, and we start to talk about your pain. Right? You've now had surgery, and it hurts. And the future is looking a little bleak. Right? And so we start to talk about pain, we start to talk about rehab, we start to talk about time frame. Where does that go? What happens from here? Right? A couple weeks go by, and we take the sutures out. Things are starting to heal. The pain is subsiding a little bit, maybe. And now we have this leg that's the size of Cincinnati. Looks like a basketball. And we have to now begin to reduce the size of that limb so that we can get it into a prosthesis, so it doesn't change so drastically in the first hour that the prosthesis no longer fits. So we do that with what we call a shrinker. It's a elastic hose, basically. It's a compression hose. It's designed to push fluid. Right? So we've got to go through our shrinker fitting. And that takes a little getting used to. That can be a little bit, now we're starting to put things on a sensitive limb, and so it takes a little bit of working through. Things are feeling good. You go for a walk on your crutches and you fall down on your leg. This hurts. You come into me, we delay your care for 2 more weeks because you've got this huge bruise and this really basically untouchable limb. Happens all the time. Right? You're shrunk down. You're ready. Finally. 4 weeks, 6 weeks later maybe. So now we have to get the stuff of your leg, the shape of your leg. Whatever it is that we need, we got to get it. Whether it's a scan or a cast or an MRI. We have to know where those areas of pain are. We have to understand more about your leg than you understand about your leg. And so we take a mold or we take a scan of that leg to begin the process of fabrication of that prosthesis. The design begins. We then have to modify that design. This is the most important part of the whole process. We take that garbage in, that cast or that scan or that mold, and we now have to find those spots that are bony and close to the skin surface. We have to find that sensitive suture spot. We have to find those little areas that you can tolerate pressure and those that you can't. Right? So this is a big important part of this process, is how you modify what you start with so that you get long-term use. Right? I'll give you a gamma card too. So now we begin the fabrication process. Right? We're starting to make this thing. We take that mold, we take that scan, and we create the prosthesis. We buy the parts, we buy the feet, we buy the connectors, we start to put it all together. Okay? That's our next card. You finally get your prosthesis. Sorry? You get the fitting card. Good. Right? So now we start the fitting process. Where does it hurt? How does it fit? How does it feel? How many socks are you wearing? Oh, it feels like you're walking on the side of your foot. Good, let's align that. We've got to align and make the relationship between the ground reaction force and the floor fit and work on day 1, right, of your prosthesis. Are you walking with crutches? Are you walking with nothing? Are you walking in the bars? How are you walking? Are you tentative? Are you sore? Right? This is part of the process. 3 days later, you come back. Hurts like hell. What happened? Change. Right? All that pressure caused that limb to change a little bit. And so now we've got to manage your socks and say, okay, we've got to get you up. You've got some change going on. Here's some re-education. Here's some process. Good, fine. We're getting from 2 crutches to 1 crutch now. Fabulous. Things are going well. A couple weeks later, you're coming back, and now you're not using crutches. But your alignment, the relationship between the floor has changed because now you're actually putting weight on the prosthesis. You're learning to walk all over again. So we're doing some alignment changes. We're making some changes in the whole thing. A couple days later, you shrink some more. You're wearing 10 socks inside because your leg has changed so much, and now we start to pad and adjust to try to make up for some of that. So we're padding and we're adjusting and we're making different things so that the prosthesis continues to fit. 2 days later, you come back because the padding hurt somewhere else. Didn't work. Doesn't help. It's painful. Right? It's hard to walk. More adjustments. And then a couple months later, we'll give Dave one. You're now up to 15 socks, 10 socks, whatever it is. The prosthesis no longer fits, and then we start the prosthesis, or start the process all over again. So I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question. Which problem does 3D printing solve in this process? How many cards are there? Hold up your cards. All right. So all of this stuff goes into the making of this. Okay? You could put them down. You can keep those, by the way. I've got that part memorized. Okay, what? I'll sign them at the end. Yeah, that's fine. So someone comes in with a prosthesis that looks a little bit like this. Okay, that's fair. But that really is only a small part of what we do in making a prosthetic device. So a couple of take-homes. We've got to critically evaluate what we do and why, not just make stuff to make stuff. Solve problems. Don't just make stuff that's equal to what we got because you've got a new trick or a new color or a new something else. Narrow our goals down, right? If we do 1 or 2 things rather than 50 things, we're going to be much more successful in our design. We learned a prosthesis is not just a series of parts. And just because you have a hammer doesn't mean everything's a nail, right? I love that expression. My old chairman used to say that all the time. He's an orthopedic surgeon. Just because you got a hammer. For me, that means 1, just because you got a 3D printer, but more importantly, is just because you have an amputation doesn't mean you need or will benefit from the use of a prosthesis. Okay? So with that, this guy, by the way, plays varsity football at St. Francis High School, varsity baseball, and up until about a month ago never wore a prosthesis. So, good question.
I just want to share that I had a moment at church. I participated in the same way. And quite a few, some of the gentlemen I recruit with are amputees, or some of us. And the very first time I sailed with a gentleman with an amputee, he took off his limbs. And I just looked at him and I saw this old person that takes it off or down to a house. And my comfort level went out the window at that point. And I asked him, why did you take your legs off? He says, well, first of all, if it gets any salt water, I'm toast right now. Not good anymore. Secondly is that I have better balance and movement without I didn't think about that because the boat is moving in different directions. The thing is moving underneath you. And he says, and I asked him, have you ever had an accident with your prosthesis? That's why we're moving. He says, yes. Because in my earlier days, I used to do my prosthesis, but it got to the point that here I am, I marvel as a entire human being, making a transition with a setup that functions so well for him on land. But he was also okay in accepting it was not functional for him in his spirit activity. And I still sail with him. And he would go back and forth all over that boat. And honestly, he was so much more graceful on the boat without his prosthesis than he is when he's out on the road. And when you talk about function and cool, it covers all that. And definitely activity is the most important thing in your profession is asking the patient, asking the user, what either can you use it.
Good. Thank you. David.
Well, you brought up 3D printing at the end. And I've been following 3D printing and prosthetics, and there's dozens of people that are doing 3D printing so to help a kid in the neighborhood, or there's even groups that work nationally and stuff, and internationally, you see in developing countries and stuff. So, I wanted to ask you, about how well these things are going to work. They typically, these articles said, well, I made this 3D printed hand for $300, and if I had to go on an island, it would be $40,000.
Right.
And so they're really glorifying these 3D printed, one-of-a-kind hands.
Yes.
And I'd really like to know what you think about them, if they're going to make a difference, or how much difference, or they're just like a flash in the pan.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. And I'll get back on my soapbox. I'll start with I'm absolutely not against 3D printing. Don't misinterpret anything I'm about to say as that. I think it's a great technology. I think the problem is that it is sold as something that it's not. Right? 3D printing is a great manufacturing technique. It will make a socket potentially. Right? But it doesn't solve all the other issues, and especially doesn't solve the long-term issues. And I think we're being misled a little bit by the cost issues. Right? Not all prostheses cost $100,000. $30 is not a correct value. Right? Yes, you can make one off for $30, but the material as it is now doesn't last that long, right? So 6 months. Think that's fair for a enable hand? 8 months as it is now? Right? And so then you're making another one. And there's a group out that uses Boy Scouts to put all of this together. So that's a freebie, but that's not a long-term business plan by any means. And you got to repair the printer. And you got to buy the materials. And so, you got to service it, and you got to do the software upgrades, and you got to buy the software and buy the printers, right? So I think we're a little bit misled on those values, first of all, and secondly, I think it doesn't cover all of those other 12 or 13 steps that we put into this thing, right? Everybody's doing it for free right now, and that's great. I mean, oh my God, what a great area and a great thing to explore. But I think we are being misled just a bit.
I think what's sort of missed in the discussion of 3D printing revolutionizing prosthetics is that it's very multifaceted in the sense that, like Dave, what you're referring to, there's an open source project online where you can download different designs and you can print out your own parts. And from what I've seen, they're primarily focused on upper extremity hand prosthetics. And the difference between bikes and hands is vast, but with hands, the challenge is function, as Gary mentioned. Like our hands do very crazy things, squeezing but not too hard, pointing, moving around, just think of all the degrees of motion, right? But they're not load bearing unless you're picking up a pulling ball. Legs, on the other hand, very, very simple. You just really need to allow the user to walk forward in a straight line on flat ground. If they can do anything other than that, that's wonderful. But they have to bear your weight all the time. And like legs, if they fail once, you fall down, which poses a risk. Depending on what kind of user you have. Whereas hands, if it fails, you may drop a brake, drop your board, it's not that big of a deal. So there's nuances in between that. 3D those things cost hundreds of dollars to buy from the manufacturers. If I have a 3D printer and an open source file and I can just 3D print in a proper material my own foot, that would be wonderful, and maybe that would revolutionize things for me if I was paying out of pocket on my own. What 3D printing doesn't solve is the socket up top, which is handmade out of carbon fiber, and the way that process works, Gary sort of alluded to it, is you take your stump, like, I've got my thigh on my left side, and you essentially get wrapped in plaster of Paris. That dries and has created a negative mold of my stump. So you think, oh, that's great, turn that into a positive socket, or a positive shape, wrap the positive around with carbon fiber, and now you've got a new mold that we refer to as a socket that I can shove my stump into. And you're partly correct, but what guys like Gary do, and I say it really breaks down to about, 60% science, 40% artistry, is when I go to a prosthetist, I take my clothes off, he casts me, we take that cast off, and throughout that process, while the plaster is drying, and once he's taken it off, my prosthetist is actually massaging my tissue into certain shapes. And if I was just standing there, unloaded, my tissue would be in a, I guess, its natural state, but not in a proper walking state. So my process is massaging certain muscles, putting them into certain places, actually applying pressure in one area, relieving pressure in another area. And then, once we make that initial socket, I finally shove my leg into it, and I say, hey, prosthetist, this is close but not perfect. Then the prosthetist comes back with a heat gun or with a Dremel and trims certain areas out, and that's pattern. And all of that is done by hand. And I've been watching it for 5.5 years now, and all I can say is it's artistry. It's 60% science, because these guys go to school and they read about it in books, and then 40% on-the-job experience and learning how am I actually going to massage that tissue. And so that's the problem that 3D printing doesn't solve, because you can technically print a socket, but it's not going to have the right nuance to it. Part of the problem is we need to come up with computer algorithms, more or less, that can take his brain and his experience, put it into a computer, so you can take my stump, 3D scan it, and instead of just having a pure cylindrical natural state shape, I need an algorithm to know what he knows, and to computationally 3D print, but with all those pressure points and relief points already in there. And then maybe you're talking, and then maybe when we have that whole combination of technologies, I could actually print an entire system at home. But that's a long way off.
Yep. So I think we're getting out of time.
Yeah.
I'll be around if you guys want to chat, and I've got some prostheses if you want to come play and you have time. I'm happy to stick around.
All right, let's give Gary a round. Anybody who can stick around can come up and check these out. Thank you for attending. Have a great weekend. See you on Tuesday.